3 days ago, at exactly 3:14 a.m., the myth of the Iron Dome didn't just crack, it dissolved into the humid night air over Tel Aviv. For 26 days, the Pentagon's press briefing room has been a theater of the elite absurd. High-ranking spokespeople stood behind walnut lecterns telling you that 99% of Iranian threats were being neutralized. They showed you grainy, night vision interception clips that looked more like fireworks than warfare. They spoke in hushed, reverent tones of hermetic seals and unparalleled defense. But what they didn't show you, and what the IDF's military censor worked overtime to scrub from the mainstream news, was the direct, catastrophic hit on the Central Security Headquarters in Tel Aviv on March 24th. This wasn't a stray piece of shrapnel or a technical malfunction. This was a precision strike that bypassed the most expensive radar network on the planet. While the White House leaks ceasefire proposals to the New York Times to stop the bleeding on Wall Street, the reality on the ground is a mathematical nightmare. Iran just launched its 10th wave of ballistic missiles in 48 hours. This isn't a desperate regime lashing out in its final hours. It's a calculated high-velocity audit of Western magazine depth, and the audit just came back with a single terrifying word: insufficient. The footage emerging from the ground tells a story the mainstream media is desperate to bury. Israeli police assessments, now being whispered in the halls of the Wall Street Journal, call the Tuesday strike a rare occurrence. Why rare? Because Tehran is innovating in real time, under fire. They aren't just relying on the old heavy hitters, the Fatah-1 hypersonics or the super heavy Khorramshahr 4s. They've introduced a new 100-kilogram precision warhead. By shrinking the payload, they have fundamentally altered the physics of the engagement. These smaller munitions have a higher terminal velocity and a drastically reduced radar cross-section, making them nearly invisible to the PAC-3 and THAAD interceptors currently guarding the Kiryat Gat corridor. Here's the math the mainstream media is terrified to do because it breaks the narrative of Western invincibility. Even if we accept the Pentagon's inflated numbers of a 95% interception rate, the math still fails at a strategic level. If Iran launches a salvo of 200 drones and missiles and 95% are intercepted, that means 10 will hit their targets. On March 24th, those 10 hits were directed with surgical, cold-blooded precision. Military analysts are now confirming that the IRGC isn't just firing blind salvos into the desert. They are receiving real-time, high-fidelity targeting data from a ghost network of Russian and Chinese satellite clusters. This explains why, despite over 600 coalition suppression strikes on Iranian launch sites, the missiles keep coming with terrifying accuracy. They aren't just hitting empty apartment blocks. They are targeting command and control, C2 nodes, fuel depots, and regional logistics hubs. On March 25th, an Iranian-manufactured Shahed-type drone, likely a Delta Wing variant with a carbon fiber skin to reduce radar return, struck the Al Dhafra Air Base in Abu Dhabi. Sources on the ground report significant structural damage to U.S. maintenance facilities housing the F-35 supply chain. The exchange ratio is now terminal. We are seeing what the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, calls a magazine abyss. In just the first 16 days of this conflict, the U.S. and Israel fired over 11,000 munitions. The cost? A staggering $26 billion. Let's look at the burn rates that the accountants at the Pentagon are screaming about behind closed doors. The U.S. inventory of ATACMS and PRSM missiles is estimated to run low in less than a month. The THAAD interceptors, which cost $12 million apiece, are facing total exhaustion within weeks. Israel's situation is even more dire. Their Arrow 3 interceptor stockpile is projected to be fully expended by the end of March. We are spending $3 million on a Patriot interceptor to stop a drone that costs less than a used Toyota. You don't need to win a dogfight when you can simply bankrupt the enemy's ammunition supply. This is a fire alarm for the Western military-industrial complex, and the water is running dry. But the real story, the one the CIA is working overtime to keep out of your feed, is happening 5,000 miles away in South Korea. As of this week, the U.S. has begun stripping Patriot batteries from the DMZ to pull the holes in the Persian Gulf. Think about the strategic insanity of that move. To protect the flow of oil in the Middle East and the security of Tel Aviv, Washington is leaving the back door wide open in the Pacific. North Korea's KPA isn't just watching. They are documenting every C-17 and C-5 Galaxy that leaves Osan Air Base. They know the interceptor stockpile is at a dangerous 25% of its required minimum. They see the same footage we do. Iranian missiles landing in the West Bank and Tel Aviv because the defense grid is simply out of bullets. Even John Mearsheimer, the titan of realist geopolitics, warned Trump directly, "This is not a strategic plan. This is a strategic liquidation." The entire U.S. intelligence community reportedly issued the same warning, but Trump chose a different path. He listened to the Israel First hawks in his inner circle, the Grahams, the Kushners, and the Witkoffs. Now, the Pacific is exposed, Japan is sending combat troops to the Philippines for the first vacuum, and the U.S. is cannibalizing its global security architecture just to maintain a failing front in the Gulf. This isn't just an Iranian victory, it's a global demonstration of American overextension. Why do these billion-dollar systems keep failing? Over the weekend, a THAAD system deployed specifically to guard Israel's strategic Negev bases and the Dimona nuclear center failed to intercept an incoming Iranian salvo. The IDF is calling it a technical malfunction. The truth is far more calculated. Iran didn't just fire at the missiles, they fired at the eyes. In the opening hours of the war, the IRGC targeted at least 4 AN/TPY-2 radars, the $500 million brains of the THAAD system. By blinding these sensors with a combination of kinetic strikes and high-intensity electronic jamming, likely aided by Russian-made Avtobaza M systems, Iran compressed the warning time from 8 minutes down to mere seconds. We saw the preview of this in May and June of 2025, when Houthi and Iranian strikes overwhelmed Ben Gurion Airport. The U.S. used up 25% of its global THAAD stockpile in those brief exchanges. Now, in 2026, those stocks are hitting zero. Watching a $15 million interceptor miss a $20,000 projectile is the ultimate symbol of the current era. The stabilizing force in the region is now watching its own shield turn into a collection of very expensive, very blind lawn ornaments. While the missiles fly in the Levant, the diplomatic tectonic plates of Europe are shifting in a way that suggests a permanent realignment. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, once the most vocal proponent of maximum pressure on Tehran, has undergone a notable, calculated linguistic shift. In his most recent addresses from the Bundestag, the standard labels like terror regime or mullah regime have vanished from his lexicon. He now refers to the country simply and neutrally as Iran. But don't mistake this for a move toward pacifism. In the same breath, Merz has sharpened his blade against the East, consistently describing the Russian government as the Moscow regime. This isn't a slip of the tongue, it is a strategic pivot. Merz recently revealed that he has had multiple high-level phone calls with Trump, expressing deep-seated concerns. He pointed out the existential risks that this Persian Gulf War poses to the global economy. But more importantly, he highlighted the strategic vacuum it creates in Eastern Europe. Europe is finally waking up to the reality that the U.S.-Israel war on Iran is the ultimate gift to Vladimir Putin. While the U.S. drains its Patriot and ATAC-MS stocks to defend Haifa, it has nothing left for Kyiv. Merz has even walked back his previous ironclad promise to send Taurus KEPD-350 cruise missiles to Ukraine. His excuse? He assumed the Bundeswehr had enough operational stock, but the weapons are there, the money is not. In reality, Germany is watching its energy-intensive industrial base crumble as the Strait of Hormuz remains a graveyard for LNG tankers. The Moscow regime is winning by simply watching the West bankrupt its own arsenal in a secondary theater. On March 26th, at approximately 14:20 local time, a new shockwave hit the Pentagon's Joint Chiefs of Staff. The IRGC Aerospace Force claimed that a mobile air defense battery, likely a localized variant of the Corded 15, successfully engaged and downed a U.S. Navy FA-18 Super Hornet off the coast of Chabahar. According to reports from Tasnim News, the aircraft took a direct hit to its starboard engine before spiraling into the Indian Ocean. While CENTCOM issued an immediate flat denial, calling the report pure psychological warfare, IRGC-affiliated media has released 3 separate angles of the engagement. One video clearly shows the distinct thermal signature of an FA-18 being tracked by an IRST, infrared search and track system, followed by a high-velocity kinetic impact. Whether the jet was downed by a missile or a catastrophic mechanical failure induced by the electronic soup of the region, the tactical result is the same. The USS Abraham Lincoln has been forced to pull back. The carrier group is now operating over 100 kilometers from the Iranian coast. This puts the carrier-based wing at the absolute limit of its combat radius. Without constant, vulnerable aerial refueling from land-based tankers, the U.S. Navy can no longer project power over the Iranian mainland. Senior Iranian official Mohsen Rizai put it bluntly, "Do American soldiers really want to die for an end game they can't even define? We're waiting." While the world was staring at the Strait of Hormuz, the Mossad was looking at a map of East Africa with a cold, calculating eye. In a move that shocked the African Union and sent tremors through the Arab League, the Israeli government formally recognized the independence of Somaliland in December 2025. On the surface, it looked like a standard diplomatic outreach. In reality, it was a high-stakes Somaliland gambit, a desperate attempt to secure a backdoor maritime corridor through the Bab el-Mandeb. The logic was simple. With 46% of Israel's crude oil originating in Azerbaijan and traditional routes through the Persian Gulf effectively turned into a kill zone by Iranian shore-to-ship missiles, Tel Aviv needed a sanctuary. Somaliland, sitting on the Gulf of Aden, was supposed to be the safe zone, but geography is a cruel mistress. By recognizing Somaliland, Israel hoped to bypass the Houthi-controlled waters of Yemen. However, the cost of this safety has proven catastrophic. Port fees, insurance premiums for high-risk war zones, and the sheer distance of rerouting Asian goods have sent the Israeli economy into a tailspin. Dubai's megaport is already seeing a total logistics collapse. The Somaliland gambit isn't a solution. It's a band-aid on a severed artery. Without the free flow of the Strait of Hormuz, the Western-aligned economies of the region are on a countdown to cardiac arrest. Just as the U.S. began to consolidate its naval assets to solve the Hormuz problem, Tehran threw a wrench into the gears. An Iranian military source, speaking to Tasnim News, issued a chilling warning. If the U.S. launches ground or naval action against Iranian soil, Tehran will not hesitate to open a second maritime front at the Bab el-Mandeb. This isn't an empty threat. The IRGC has spent years perfecting asymmetric maritime denial. They don't need a massive blue water navy. They only need a few hundred smart mines, a dozen suicide fast boats, and the drone swarms they've already proven can overwhelm Aegis-class destroyers. At midnight, on March 26th, the lights offshore at Bandar Abbas weren't from the city. They were from hundreds of tankers sitting dead in the water, unable to obtain transit clearance. As conventional military options dwindle, the Trump administration has reportedly floated what analysts call the hydraulic option, striking Iran's critical hydroelectric infrastructure. The primary targets? The Karun 3 and Masjed Soleiman dams. A breach of these structures wouldn't just be a military strike, it would be an act of total environmental warfare. A high-velocity flood wave would be unleashed, capable of drowning the low-lying cities of Khuzestan, home to millions of civilians, in the heart of Iran's oil industry. They've even whispered about targeting the Bushehr nuclear power plant. An attack there could trigger a reactor core melt, sending a radioactive plume across the entire Persian Gulf. But this is a double-edged sword. Iran's power grid is incredibly resilient. 130 thermal and hydroelectric plants spread across a vast, mountainous landscape. Obliterating it isn't an afternoon's work for a few B-2 bombers. It's a months-long campaign of attrition the U.S. doesn't have the munitions to finish. Late official Ali Larijani's warning haunts the Pentagon. Darkness provides ample opportunity to hunt down U.S. servicemen running for safety. Iran has already warned that if their grid goes down, the whole region goes dark in half an hour. In Tehran, the IRGC has begun using a biting new label for the Western alliance, the Epstein Coalition. This isn't just a slur. It's a psychological operation designed to highlight the perceived moral decay of the Western leadership. Trump's inner circle, the Grahams, the Kushners, and the Witkoffs, are seen not as strategic masterminds, but as hawks who have commodified American blood for regional interest. The strikes on Dimona and Haifa weren't just tactical, they were a direct reply to Trump's ultimatums. The coalition's victory is being reported in Washington as a fait accompli, but on the ground, the Epstein Coalition is finding that money cannot buy physics, and their 99% interception rate is a mathematical ghost. While the physical war is fought with kinetic interceptors and ballistic trajectories, a parallel war is being waged for the very architecture of your perception. Expert Chase Hughes recently pulled back the curtain on what insiders call the recruitment claw, the CIA's sophisticated influence engine designed to maintain the pro-war narrative among the Western public. It doesn't start with a bribe, it starts with a digital audit. The agency targets high-reach influencers, those with the trust of the skeptical demographic. They show the creator their own private history, browsing logs, webcam metadata, or deleted encrypted messages. Once the leverage is established, they pivot to praise and protection. They make the influencer feel like an essential gear in the machine of national security. Then comes the retainer, a $20,000 a month consulting fee to ensure the narrative remains aligned. Even if it feels a little off, you'll still feel like you're doing the right thing, Hughes explains. It's why you see independent geopolitical analysts suddenly using the same scripted talking points about Iranian collapse and surgical success, despite the empirical evidence of the magazine abyss. Zelensky recently dropped a bombshell in an interview with Reuters, confirming that Russia is actively blackmailing the United States. The deal is cold. Moscow will stop sharing high-fidelity military intelligence with Tehran only if Washington cuts off Ukraine's access to the U.S. satellite and signals intelligence SIGINT feed. I have reports from our services showing Russia is saying, "I will not pass on intelligence to Iran if America stops passing intelligence to Ukraine," Zelensky revealed. This is the ultimate two-front trap. For every Patriot battery moved from Poland to the Persian Gulf, the Moscow regime gains ground. The U.S. is now being forced to choose between the survival of the Greater Israel Project and the preservation of the Ukrainian front. Washington has even offered Zelensky security guarantees if Kiev cedes the Donbass, a desperate move to free up the logistical bandwidth needed to fight a war in the Gulf that they are already losing on paper. The technical reality of the 2026 battlefield has moved beyond the Predator drone era. Reports from the Iranian interior have confirmed the spotting of Eagle drones, biomimetic surveillance platforms that are nearly indistinguishable from natural birds to the naked eye and traditional X-band radar. These aren't your hobbyist drones. They utilize flapping wing technology and synthetic feathers that mimic the thermal signature of a living creature. They are designed to loiter over high-value targets like the Kiryat Gat missile silos or U.S. forward operating bases in the region. Because they don't use traditional propulsion, they have no acoustic signature. They are the eyes of the abyss, providing terminal guidance for the final 5% of Iranian missiles that the Iron Dome cannot touch. When the IRGC claims they have all enemy movements under surveillance, they aren't talking about satellites that can be jammed. They're talking about a biotic mesh that covers the region. You can't jam a bird that isn't using a standard radio frequency. The U.S. is reportedly preparing for Operation Epic Fury's final phase, a ground operation to seize Karg Island, Iran's primary oil terminal. But the intelligence suggests a meat grinder scenario. Iran has reinforced the island with elite Sabrin commandos, layered S-300 and Bavar 373 air defenses, and a literal carpet of anti-armor and anti-personnel mines. U.S. officials, speaking anonymously to CNN, warned that an invasion would face unprecedented losses since the Korean War. The IRGC's honeycombed defensive positions are designed for deep attrition. They want the U.S. to land. They want the Epstein Coalition to commit its ground forces to a tiny 20-square-kilometer rock that can be turned into a kill box by mainland artillery in minutes. The victory Mike Johnson is bragging about in the House is a mirage. The reality is a trap that is about to snap shut on the 82nd Airborne. The most critical date on the 2026 calendar isn't a military anniversary, it's May 14th. This is the rescheduled date for the high-stakes summit between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping in Beijing. The White House has officially postponed the meeting twice, citing the fluidity of Operation Epic Fury. In reality, Trump is stalling because he has no cards left to play. China has spent the last month watching the United States exhaust its high-end munitions, specifically the PAC-3 and THAAD interceptors, at a rate that would leave the U.S. Pacific Command, Indopacom, completely defenseless in a conflict over the Taiwan Strait. Beijing isn't just a neutral observer. They are the silent auditor of the magazine abyss. For every billion-dollar carrier group the U.S. pins down in the North Arabian Sea, the Pacific Backdoor swings wider. When Trump eventually sits across from Xi, he won't be negotiating from a position of maximum pressure. He will be negotiating for a lifeline. Rumors are swirling in the Swiss banking sector that Washington is quietly seeking a debt for stability swap, asking China to stop its quiet support of the Iranian ghost network in exchange for massive trade concessions. But Xi knows the math. Why settle for a deal when you can simply watch your primary global rival go bankrupt, stopgap funding a war they can't finish? If you look at satellite imagery of the Iranian coast near Bandar Abbas, you'll see something the mainstream media refuses to explain: the ghost ships. There are currently over 140 ultra-large crude carriers, ULCCs, and LNG tankers sitting dead in the water. They aren't moving, they aren't broadcasting AIS, automatic identification system signals, and they aren't paying demurrage. These are the hostages of the abyss. Iran has effectively turned the Strait of Hormuz into a sovereign toll road. Any vessel belonging to a member of the Epstein Coalition or the Greater Israel Project is denied transit, but it's more than just a blockade. The IRGC has reportedly installed electronic leashes on these vessels, localized GPS spoofing units that make it impossible for the U.S. Navy to identify which ships are empty and which are loaded with volatile cargo. This creates a human shield of steel and oil. If the U.S. attempts a freedom of navigation strike, they risk a massive environmental catastrophe that would coat the shores of their own regional allies in black sludge. Back in the United States, the Epic Fury narrative is meeting the pump reality. As of this morning, the national average for a gallon of gasoline has crossed the $5.15 mark. In California and the Northeast, it's flirting with $7. The Federal Reserve is in a state of emergency, watching the magazine abyss translate directly into a supply chain abyss. Trump's base, the very people who cheered the decapitation of the Iranian leadership, are now looking at their bank statement of the situation is that you cannot fight a high-intensity war in the world's primary energy artery without destroying your own domestic economy. The White House is trying to blame country-hating Democrats and globalist sabotage, but the math is undeniable. The U.S. is spending $26 billion every 2 weeks to keep a war going that is raising the cost of living for every American. This is the claw in reverse. The CIA can control the influencers, but they can't control the price of eggs. We are seeing a domestic fatigue that is forcing Trump toward the Islamabad channel. The victory Caroline Leavitt talks about at the podium is a phantom. The reality is a superpower that is being bled dry by $20,000 drones and $2 used car-priced Shaheeds. We began this audit at 03:14 a.m. with a dissolved myth. We end this volume with a dissolved empire. The 2026 conflict has proven that strategic depth is not measured in the number of carriers you have, but in the number of interceptors you can afford to lose. The US has proven it has the former, but the magazine abyss has proven it lacks the latter. The Greater Israel Project has hit the wall of Iranian, Turkish-Russian realpolitik. The Moscow regime has successfully traded its silence in the Gulf for a free hand in the Donbass. And the American public is left to wonder, what exactly did we buy for $26 billion? Subscribe now. In Volume 2 of the final audit, we are going deep into the Draft 2026 protocols, the classified contingency plan for when the US officially runs out of missiles and has to start spending human capital. The audit isn't over, it's just getting started.